continues. The focus of my remarks this morning is to provide a congressional perspective on missile defense. My reactions to the recent missile defense decisions by the Obama administration, including its announcement to scrap plans to deploy missile defense assets in Poland and the Czech Republic, and the implications of such decisions. European missile defense is an important national security and foreign policy issue, and it merits comprehensive examination. I know you'll hear from several administration officials who will provide one perspective. Some in Congress agree. However, others, like myself, will disagree, and others will at least be skeptical. I think it is valuable for you to hear those different viewpoints to give you a sense of the key issues and concerns that will shape the future debate within Congress. First, I want to start by saying that I'm incredibly proud of our nation's missile defense accomplishments and the dedicated men and women behind them. In less than 5 years, the United States fielded a defensive capability of ground-based interceptors, Aegis ships, Patriot batteries, and radars. All along, the naysayers, including some in Congress, insisted that it wouldn't work, but MDA proved them wrong. They did it through focused research and development and successful testing. A testing record, by the way, that currently stands at 39 for 49. They had the strong political and financial commitment of an administration and a majority in Congress who recognized the importance of this mission. It is clear that missile defense technology works. It is also clear that the investments made to date in this defensive capability have given us a tangible level of protection against ballistic missiles fired in anger or by accident. Our reliance on it during North Korea's recent missile launches is a case in point. North Korea and Iran also use their missiles and nuclear programs as tools of coercion. Our missile defense capabilities reduce our vulnerability to such intimidation. Given the fact that representatives from NATO, Australia, France, Germany, India, Israel, Italy, Japan, the Netherlands, and the UK are here to discuss their efforts in missile defense, I have to believe that our friends and allies also value its security benefits. Let me repeat, the technology works. However, these systems are nascent. The community is constantly improving its knowledge of these highly complex systems. Congress has required greater testing, particularly under operationally realistic conditions. We are also pressing the Pentagon to increase the reliability and sustainability of existing systems, grow its inventory, and expand capabilities to address current and emerging threats. Congress has taken a consistent bipartisan position in these areas. We also strongly believe in collective security and honoring our commitments to our friends and our allies. And we share in the desire to expand our collective missile defense capabilities through international cooperation. However, the decision last Thursday by the administration to abandon plans for European missile defense sites in Poland and the Czech Republic, unfortunately, leaves the opposite impression. A significant number of members in the House and Senate disagree with the administration's decisions. I think it is fraught with questionable assumptions and considerable geopolitical consequences, and I have told this to senior administration officials with whom I have spoken. A central justification for the administration's decision is allegedly a new threat assessment, which suggests that the threat from Iran's longer-range ballistic missiles has been slower to develop, while its short- and medium-range ballistic missiles are growing more rapidly than previously expected. They believe that this is the real near-term threat that we should be worried about. I can't come to the same conclusion as the administration. This is a sudden change and inconsistent with the frequent briefings, intelligence reports, and testimony that the House Armed Services Committee has received from intelligence and defense officials. After Iran successfully launched a satellite earlier this year, then Director of the Defense Intelligence Agency, General Michael Maples, stated, Iran's February 2, 2009 launch of the Sphere space launch vehicle shows progress in mastering technology needed to produce ICBMs. The current White House, through a spokesman, concurred Iran's development of a space launch vehicle capable of putting a satellite into orbit establishes the technical basis from which Iran could develop long-range ballistic missile systems. This is a matter of deep concern. Later, in March 2009, General Craddock, then commander of U.S. European Command, testified before the committee, quote, by 2015, Iran may also deploy an intercontinental ballistic missile capable of reaching all of Europe and parts of the U.S., end quote. In May 2009, an unclassified intelligence report by the National Air and Space Intelligence Center stated, quote, with sufficient foreign assistance, Iran could develop and test an ICBM capable of reaching the United States by 2015. I do not believe that Congress should ignore the expert testimony and information that we have received to date. No administration official has yet to answer my basic question. Is the long-range threat diminishing? Despite these judgments from key apolitical intelligence and defense organizations, there seems to be this certainty by some that the Iranians can't develop an IRBM or an ICBM by 2015, and that these aren't real threats to the U.S. or our allies. This, even though Iran continues to demonstrate the requisite technology and work closely with the North Koreans, who themselves appear to be pursuing ICBMs. Furthermore, let's not forget that according to press reports, the North Koreans supplied Iran with 18 BM-25 RBMs in 2005. Intelligence is an imprecise business. I'd like to think of intelligence analysis as trying to put together a 1,000-piece puzzle with only 20 pieces of the puzzle. There are gaps and uncertainties. To be fair, there are cases where we've seen a potential adversary take longer to develop a capability than previously estimated. But there are also cases where one has mastered a technology in a relatively short amount of time and where we have all been taken by surprise. Our insight is further limited when you have countries like Iran or North Korea that have gone underground and worked hard to mask their activities. Yes, I am equally concerned by the proliferation and growth in short and medium-range missiles. They are a threat to our allies, particularly in the Middle East and Asia, and to our forward-deployed troops. Thus, growing the capabilities and inventories of theater defenses is incredibly important. But I think that the administration is missing the broader point strategically. There should not be this false trade to do theater defense now and longer-range defenses later. In reality, we need both to deal with the evolving threat. And I think that had the missile defense budget not been reduced by $1.2 billion below last year's level, we could have continued to pursue both. The new architecture being proposed by the administration, the, quote, phased adaptive approach for missile defense in Europe, end quote, is not so new. The plan to develop and field increasingly capable theater missile defenses as well as a comprehensive architecture was already in place by the previous administration, as last year's budgets have previously reflected. But let's revisit what that basic plan was. First, there was to be a NATO-wide missile defense architecture to address the full range of threats. The U.S. would contribute a long-range missile defense system that would cover the U.S. and most of Europe, while our NATO allies were encouraged to contribute assets in the shorter ranges to fill in the gaps. Meanwhile, the U.S. would also continue to build up its Aegis and THAAD inventories to provide further coverage in Europe, the Middle East, and the Pacific. All, and I repeat, all NATO heads of state and government signed on to this basic agreement at the April 2008 Bucharest summit. They declared, quote, ballistic missile proliferation poses an increased threat to allies' forces, territory, and populations. Missile defense forms part of a broader response to counter this threat. We therefore recognize the substantial contribution to the protection of allies from long-range ballistic missiles to be provided by the planned deployment of European-based United States missile defense assets. We are exploring ways to link this capability with current NATO missile defense efforts, close quote. This was reaffirmed in a December 2008 meeting of NATO foreign ministers. Now it seems that the United States will provide short, medium, and eventually long-range missile defenses for Europe. The original bargain is no longer in place, and NATO will have to go back to the drawing board. It is unclear what role and contribution our European allies will now have to make to this new architecture. The administration laid out a four-phased approach that it believes is less technically risky and provides more comprehensive coverage sooner. However, the 2011 Phase 1 and 2015 Phase 2 deployments of Aegis, SM-3 Block 1A, 1B, and THAAD systems provides only modest coverage of Europe, unless the administration significantly increases the number of ship stations and THAAD batteries. And they provide little coverage of the U.S. against Iranian ICBMs. This new approach doesn't provide protection for most of Europe against medium and interrange ballistic missiles until 2018, or protection of the U.S. against ICBMs until 2020. Protection of the U.S. requires a new interceptor, the SM-3 Block 2B, that no one had really had discussions about, or we'd not heard about until last Thursday. It doesn't exist, and we're unfamiliar with its current funding stream. Meanwhile, the two-stage ground-based interceptor that was intended to protect Europe and the United States against a range of missiles is over 90% similar to the interceptors currently in Alaska and California, was to be flight tested in fiscal year 2010, and under the original plan, fielded in Poland by 2013, obviously providing coverage much earlier to a wide range of risks and threats. Whatever the details, it is not clear that this new plan represents a less technically risky approach that protects Europe and the U.S. sooner and more comprehensively, as the administration asserts. Furthermore, this new approach is likely to remain problematic for Russia and require additional host country agreements. Should Iran have an IRBM or an ICBM capability by 2015 or even 2018, this new approach could leave parts of Europe vulnerable for several years and the United States vulnerable for up to 5 years. I worry that we're offering Tehran an open invitation to focus on long-range missile development, which it is already doing. It is also striking that this decision does not appear to have been made on the basis of cost effectiveness. According to a 2008 independent report required by Congress, the Czech and Polish proposal was the most cost-effective solution to protect the U.S. and Europe. Aegis SM-3 Block 1A, Block 1B, and Block 2A, as well as THAAD capabilities, were assessed as capable systems, but not as cost-effective, and all had significant inventory implications. I've asked the Pentagon to declassify this report to support a full and robust debate on how best to deploy a European missile defense system to protect the U.S., our forward-deployed troops, and our allies. In the meantime, skeptics in Congress look forward to receiving details supporting the administration's assertion that this new approach is less costly. Even more so than the technical and cost concerns, some in Congress, including myself, would argue that the most disconcerting aspect of the decision are its geopolitical consequences, starting with its effect on our relationships with friends and allies. The Czech Republic and Poland, who have troops in Afghanistan fighting along U.S. forces, went out on a limb. They agreed to host U.S. long-range missile defense assets despite it being domestically unpopular. Their leaders made these decisions because it was important. They saw the long-term security benefits, and they were committed to a strong relationship with the U.S. Many in Congress view this as going back on a commitment, particularly after bipartisan congressional delegations took trip after trip to tell these nations that once they approved the missile defense agreements, the U.S. would provide funding and support. I would encourage the administration to actively engage our Polish and Czech friends. These alliances are too important to neglect. I would also urge them to place a priority on expanding cooperative security activities with Prague and Warsaw, and consider accelerating plans to deploy a Patriot battery in Poland by 2012. There is a significant divide on Russia. Many in Congress are concerned that this decision is a concession to Russia. The administration has been adamant in stating that it was not linking the START follow-on treaty with missile defense despite Russia's pressure to do so. Coincidentally, on the eve of START negotiations in Geneva, the administration gave Russia the concession it wanted. The U.S. got nothing. Well, except for the hope in exchange that Russia would assist in stopping Iran's nuclear and ballistic missile programs. So what was Russia's reaction? Prime Minister Putin remarked the day after, quote, "The latest decision by President Obama has positive implications, and I very much hope that this very right and brave decision will be followed by others." Will be followed by others, other decisions by us, not actions by the Russians. As I wrote to the President last March, if Russia perceives it can gain U.S. concessions on missile defense now, it will more likely demand greater concessions later. What is clear is that the Kremlin expects shifts in U.S. policy without having to take equivalent action. We have no indication that Russia will cooperate on Iran. However, Russian leaders have indicated a fundamental disagreement with the West in our view on the proposed threat by Iran and continue to oppose tougher sanctions. This is incredibly problematic. Gambling on concessions and getting nothing in return is a dangerous and risky national security policy. There is also concern about the second and third order effects of this decision. Perceptions matter. Will allies and friends think twice before cooperating with the United States on missile defense? Will they view U.S. defense commitments more skeptically in the future? Will allies and friends perceive a weakening of the U.S. vis-a-vis Russia? The headline of a daily paper in the Czech Republic read, quote, "No radar, Russia won," end quote. Will Russia and Iran use this decision as an opening to be more assertive in their foreign policy? These are challenging geopolitical questions that will continue to be asked. Though there will be disagreement on the administration's decision, there is no doubt about our bipartisan commitment to collective security. I would hope that our international visitors here today will relay to their capitals the message that the United States Congress is committed to international missile defense cooperation. As a member of the House Armed Services Committee and a NATO parliamentarian, I have had the opportunity to travel on multiple occasions to our NATO partner countries. As the administration's Russia reset policy began to emerge, it became clear to me that we needed to reinforce our transatlantic security policy and our transatlantic relationships first. As a result, I introduced a bipartisan bill entitled NATO First, which sought to reassure our allies and strengthen our transatlantic security policies through concrete measures. These included increased funding for European missile defense, committing to the development of a U.S. Patriot battery in Poland by 2020, and ensuring that the START follow-on treaty did not limit missile defense. The House Armed Services Committee successfully included 6 of the 8 provisions in the defense authorization bill that the House passed in June. Currently, we are negotiating with the Senate on these provisions as part of a conference of our defense bill. My legislation on European missile defense does open the door to alternatives. However, the alternative must be at least as cost-effective and operationally available as the third site that was proposed in protecting both the United States and Europe. It must also be deployed ahead of the threat, because if we wait until after, it's already too late. Perhaps the ultimate litmus test for the administration's new approach will be whether it is funded. What are the programs? What is the cost? And bottom line, will program investments match the administration's new policy? All this must be done in what is expected to be a declining defense budget scenario. According to reports, the Secretary of Defense has directed the Pentagon to cut an additional $60 billion from defense budgets over the next 5 years. I worry that the administration may continue to believe that MDA is an attractive target for cuts. MDA already sustained a $1.2 billion reduction this year, and key programs were cut. This included current capabilities like the GMD system in Alaska and future capabilities like the airborne laser and kinetic energy interceptor. Though theater missile defense programs were increased by $900 million, even they had less inventory purchased than anticipated. I want to reemphasize that. Even they had less inventory purchases than had been anticipated. There is nothing left to cut unless the administration intends to further scale back GMD or terminate promising technologies. To be sure, General O'Reilly has some tough decisions ahead of him. During the April 5th speech in Prague, the President stated, quote, "As long as the threat from Iran persists, we will go forward with a missile defense system that is cost-effective and proven. If the Iranian threat is eliminated, we will have a stronger basis for security, and the driving force for missile defense construction in Europe will be removed." Well, absent any congressional hearings or briefings on the decision, I can only go on what I know to date. The Iranian threat from missiles of all ranges is clearly not eliminated. Furthermore, I have not seen any evidence that the new approach would be more cost-effective at protecting the U.S. and Europe. The capabilities that the administration would like to rely on for defense of the U.S. currently are programs that do not exist. And finally, I don't believe the perceived benefits of the administration's new approach outweigh the geopolitical consequences. John Adams, the great Boston patriot, wrote in a letter to James Lloyd in January of 1815, quote, "National defense is one of the cardinal duties of a statesman," close quote. In this letter, Adams reflected on his efforts in 1775 to establish an American Navy, believing that it would strengthen U.S. security in the face of evolving sea-based threats. Despite the domestic unpopularity of a U.S. Navy at the time, Adams pressed ahead because it was the right decision. I continue to believe that pushing ahead with missile defense is the right decision to strengthen the national defense of the U.S. and our European allies. And I look forward to working with you to advance missile defense technology and capability to protect both the United States and our allies. Thank you for having me.